Hi, friends, and welcome to the 1840 podcast, where each month we explore a different topic balancing modern sensibilities with traditional sensitivities to give you new approaches to timeless Jewish ideas. I'm your host, David Beshefkin, and today we are exploring our annual exploration of Teshuva. Thank you so much to our series sponsors, Daniel and Mira Stokar. I am so grateful for your friendship and support over all these years. This podcast is part of a larger exploration of those big, juicy Jewish ideas. So be sure to check out 1840.org. That's 18forty.org, where you can also find videos, articles, recommended readings, and weekly emails. I am so excited about today's episode, which really, I think, touches upon a new form of Teshuva that we are seeing before our eyes, and that is Teshuva, which literally means return. We always talk about return to ourselves, return to that spiritual part, return to God. I think there is a different form of Teshuva, which is Teshuva to community. You know, I grew up, and most communities that people lived in, it felt like they had existed forever. Felt like the community that I grew up in was like there from the beginning of creation. And now what I hear over and over again was when people were growing up and moving into different Jewish communities, there was like a struggle with finding community, building community. And especially now, post October 7th, I think there are so many Jews who are awakening. They're returning to their own self. They're returning to God. They're returning to Jewish life. But sometimes the last struggle, which for many people could be so hard, is like, how do I return to Jewish community? What's the community that makes sense for me? And today's conversation is with an absolutely remarkable couple, students of my dear friend, Rav Shlomo Katz. What I find so remarkable about this couple is, aside from their own Teshuva story, which we absolutely explore, what I find so amazing is they are beginning a new community in Israel, a place where people can really find community as they return, specifically for Olim, people who are moving to Israel for the first time. I think this is the teshuva of our moment, of creating a communal experience, which is so hard to find. Very often people struggle, and I think this is genuinely a form of teshuva. They struggle with finding community. I think it's very normal. All Jews can be a little Goldilocks. I think all people are a little Goldilocks when it comes to finding a community. They want one that's not too hot, not too cold. The porridge has to be just right. And what I find really so important in this very moment is that Israel was not built very communally oriented. And part of the things that we take for granted, specifically in America, is like these long-lasting communities. You know, I was raised in the 5 towns. It's been around. It hasn't been what it is now for that long, but like it just feels like it was there forever. They're very old shuls and old people. Israel as a country has been there for so long, but like really vibrant community can be very hard to find, especially for young people moving there for the first time. And that's why I think a part of Teshuva is learning how to feel connected to community. Whether that's a Jewish community in the diaspora, in America, in the States, in Canada, Australia, wherever it may be, or a community in Israel. I think now is the time to find community specifically in Israel, but this struggle is for everyone. How do we find community? How do we build community? What are the ingredients that it actually takes? This is the teshuva for our moment. Judaism is a team sport. It is not meant to be practiced in isolation. In fact, it could be some of the most painful moments that people grapple with is when Yiddishkeit is, we need to practice it alone. You don't yet have family. You don't have friends nearby. But I think learning how to cultivate and build community is absolutely the form of teshuva in our moment, a place where not just you individually can find a home and build a home, but building a place that can include many people from many different backgrounds on many different journeys. And as hard as that may seem, as difficult as community can sometimes be for our identity, because everybody wants a community that kind of perfectly reflects their values. And community by nature never perfectly reflects any individual's values. A community is a group project that emerges collectively from everyone's participation. And that is why I am so excited for today's episode. It is so important. It is about an individual teshuva journey, but it's about so much more. It's about a teshuva that leads to community, a teshuva that creates not just a space for one person, one individual, but for others. An anecdote that I once heard from my dear friend and mentor, Rabbi Moshe Benovitz, is that, somebody who you're going and you schlep a chair to bring it over for yourself, that's a schlepper. You bring a chair from one room to another for you to sit down on, you're officially a schlepper. You schlepped a chair, good for you. When you bring two chairs, not just for you to sit down, but a place for somebody else to sit down, now you're no longer a schlepper, you're a helper. That's what this episode is about. How to do a teshuva that creates not just space for ourselves, but for the people, the friends next to us. Bringing a chair, not just for us to sit down, but for somebody else to find a home. So without further ado, here's our conversation with Ben and Yael de Toledo. Friends, I am so excited for today's conversation with Ben and Yael de Toledo, an incredible couple from Israel, building communities with a story of your own. Before we get to what you're doing in Israel, which is miracles built on miracles built on miracles, your own story is miraculous. I want to hear from each of you, and maybe we'll start with you, Yael, if that's okay.
Mhm.
Tell me about the world that you were born into, your childhood, your upbringing. What was that Jewish world like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in a very engaged, non Orthodox family in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. And there's no better word to describe my background than really a cholent pot of Jewish experiences. We grew up in a Chabad synagogue, which gave me tremendous love for Judaism, really ignited a flame and a certain light for me.
So growing up, you knew about Chabad. If I would have asked you, you know, 15-year-old Yael, what type of practicing Jew are you? Would you have even known how you would describe yourself? What would you have said?
I think I would have said that I'm really a mix of different Jewish experiences. We had that Chabad background giving us a lot of light for observant life. And then at the same time, I went to a Reform summer camp, and that gave me so much of my base in Judaism. It gave me love for the power of Jewish community, for the vibrance of singing together and just sharing in our Jewish values.
I love that you look back fondly
Very
at
much.
meaning even though your life is no longer, kind of rooted in that community, it still plays a foundational role. And you don't look back. I try to point this out. So often there's a phenomenon that when you grow in a different direction than your community of origin, to knock it, to because it's coming from that self-hatred. And I love somebody who projects like, oh, it was beautiful. We built on it. We went in a different direction, but
Gave me so much of my foundation. And absolutely, I mean,
what would
it
you pinpoint you're the reform camp, summer camp that you went to, and you think about that foundation, what comes to mind? What's the memory? What's the image?
there's one thing that really stands out when I look back on that experience, which was the Israeli camper and staff program they brought in, which infused the camp with such a love for Israel. Again, it wasn't a particularly religious camp, but there was a love for Israel that was built upon the relationships built between campers with each other and with their staff members. And even to take that a step further, my family was a host family for these campers and staff. So every year, we weren't going to Israel, but we had Israel coming into our home. And that gave me a profound love for Israel from a very young age. And I felt like that was part of me. Now, we had my cousins who would come and live with us for maybe a month or so at a time. And they exposed us to a world of Judaism that was real and that was theirs.
It wasn't uncomfortable having cousins and family who were, we were the Orthodox cousins
Mhm.
in our family.
Mhm.
And one of my father's biggest regrets is that we didn't get together more often just to be able to share with the cousins our life. For your parents, it wasn't ever a challenge or an issue like inviting over. You understand what I'm saying?
My parents really are the type of Jews who embody learn from everyone. They just loved it, and they loved that we were learning from these experiences and from these lights of humans that were in our lives, our cousins. And there was no contradiction. There was just love and interest in that. And we could ask them questions. We could jump in with them. We could sit around and play guitar with them. They were approachable and they were ours. So too with the Israelis that would come stay with us each summer. And both of those, though different expressions of people, really formed a certain love both for Israel and for religious life and sort of
And
the
it's very, like,
complexity of.
organic the
Mhm.
way that you were introduced to it, which I think is really it plays a role even in what you're doing today. I wanna turn over to Ben. You also had kind of an interesting or an atypical upbringing, certainly for a couple doing what you're doing now in Israel. What do you associate with those early memories growing up? Tell me the Jewish world that you were born into.
Absolutely. So whenever we're sharing our story and juxtaposing our backgrounds, I often say that the shul that my family didn't go to growing up was a Reform temple, whereas the shul that Yael's family didn't go to was a Chabad temple. Um, Yael's family is very Hamish in their core. My parents are wonderful, but less Hamish in that way. But from a young age, I had the privilege of being in really excellent Jewish institutions. I started off going to a fantastic temple, Wilshire Boulevard Temple in Los Angeles, who at the time was led by Rabbi Steve Leader, who continues to be a very close and dear mentor of mine to this day.
Wow.
Then I went to community day school for middle school. And that same year, my family went to Israel for the first time. And I started going to Jewish summer camp at Camp Alanim, which is at the Brandeis Bardin campus of the American Jewish University in Los Angeles. Those two experiences together, combined with starting in a Jewish day school environment, totally transformed my life because I saw for the first time a really embodied and lived Jewish experience that wasn't just the teachers at Sunday school. It was the people who were leading those institutions and the kids who were singing around the Shabbos table at camp, the rabbis who weren't just wearing suits and ties, but who were wearing shorts and playing baseball with us. And that's where I first learned to daven. That's where I first learned to feel Shabbos viscerally. And that's, I think, what really sparked in me a desire to want to learn more and continue gravitating towards the most Jewish pieces of those experiences.
When did you each realize or have the first thought that the direction I am going in is going to require me to make a more almost like formal departure or find another form of communal expression? Meaning, instead of gravitating towards the orthodox world, where especially in the United States the divisions are even stronger, but in Israel it's different, but it might be even more like separate in Israel. Like you don't
Mhm.
really see non-Orthodox community quite as prominent in Israel as you do in America. There's a host of reasons for that. But but when did you each first realize that your communities of origin are not going to be your home base for the rest of your life?
I think I had an early sign of departure when I was in high school, and I was part of BBYO and was able to rise within that organization into different leadership roles, eventually becoming the president of my region. And that was an opportunity to take the leadership on my own shoulders. Started to feel like this is my own. If something's going to happen, I need to help to drive that forward. If I want to see change, I need to be part of that. So that was sort of the making of that feeling. And that stuck with me throughout college. I was a student at the University of Michigan and eventually went on to take a semester abroad at Hebrew University, where I met Ben, and I was part of what's called the Nachshon Project through the Legacy Heritage Foundation. And in this program, they brought together lots of different Jewish leaders with the goal of going into Jewish professional work and building Jewish professionals. And I came in, I definitely felt like I deserved to be here, but all of a sudden, I felt like I don't know what they're talking about. I don't know what's on the bookshelf, and I was missing something foundational. And I started to wonder, even with all of my gratitude to these organizations that have shaped me, which I really do feel, but even with that, I'm missing something here, and I need to go deeper. I need to understand what really is making this tradition that I need to hold, that I want to pass on to my children. And somewhere along the line, there's a bit of a disconnect. What I believe, sort of the kavana side, isn't exactly keeping up with the kavua side. How am I going to bring this into my life in a way where I can say, we have, there are facts on the ground that are going to cement my Judaism into place for generations to come?
You snuck in a statement. I want you to develop that a little bit because it was really profound. Where you said, "How do you kind of balance your kavana side with your kavua side?" Kavana means intention and thought, and kavua means a permanence. Just explain what you mean by that
I
of like
think
learning how to navigate that.
the kavana side, as you said, being the side of intention, and it's vital. It's vital to be, in that place of feeling, and I'm really tapping into the Judaism. But without the kavua side, the day after day practice, it's very hard to guarantee that you can pass down the tradition, year after year, generation after
It's hard to
generation, all
hold
the more
water in
so.
your hands where,
Right.
like, I have it right now and, like, I could drink it right now, but you need a container.
Exactly. And so that's where I think that the observant practice, where the Orthodox practice really comes into place, because that's, as you said, the container. That's what enables sort of, there are no guarantees in life, but that's what sort of enables that, as close to you can get as a guarantee. These practices will be passed down and cherished and valued because there are certain things that you have to do. And there are certain staples that keep your Jewish life together.
I love that idea, and I think it's so profound. Halacha is so often misunderstood as the most, like, suffocating, confining, moving, and the way that you're explaining it, which I think is the actual intention of halacha, which is to connect us obviously to God, but also to connect us to the entirety of the Jewish people, not just in this generation, in previous generations, in
Mhm.
earlier generations. I think is something absolutely remarkable. I want to shift with the same question for you, like, I sometimes call it like a nexus event, which is comes from a Marvel short series, the Loki series, where they talk about how multiverses are created. There's like this nexus event where you start to realize that I'm going to have to kind of break off from the trajectory of where my life would more routinely take me and start making decisions to build a new direction. When did you, Ben, first realize, same question that I asked Yael, that your community of origin is not going to be the container for the remainder of your life?
My inflection point was a bit earlier than Yael's. Despite growing up in a fantastic community in Los Angeles, I sort of intuitively knew as in high school that somehow the East Coast was more serious Jewishly. And so I ended up coming to college in New York. And when I got to university, my first year, I was at the joint program between Columbia University and the Jewish Theological Seminary. And I realized very quickly that the most serious Jews had spent a year or 2 years even in Israel. And while it was fantastic to be in New York and it was fantastic to be a freshman in college, I was consciously aware of the fact that that opportunity was always going to be there. Whereas this unique island in time called the gap year program was time bound, it was limited. And therefore, after my first year in college, I ended up taking a year off and I ended up coming to Israel. Now, I went on a program called Kivunim, which was not a yeshiva program. I didn't even know really about yeshiva programs at the time, but it was a program that drew students from diverse backgrounds and a lot of modern Orthodox and serious conservative homes. So even though they themselves
Are not formally Orthodox.
weren't formally Orthodox, or even if they were formally Orthodox, for them, it wouldn't have necessarily been appropriate to go to yeshiva. However, many of their peers were in Israel. So I'll just give you an example of one. I think it was a Thursday evening. We're at Machne Yehuda, and all of a sudden I realized that some of my friends know like the whole place. They know everyone.
You know everybody in Mach.
Everybody there on Thursday night. And I turned to one of them and I said, "How do you know everyone here? Like, aren't we on a gap year? Like, how do you know everyone?"
Like we're in the middle of we're in the Middle East right now.
We're in
How
the
do you
middle
know
there.
anybody?
And he turns to me and he says, "You don't understand. 98% of my grade is in Israel this year." And that was a real light bulb moment for me. And throughout the rest of the year, I became friends with a lot of those students. And that was
You like discovered the yeshiva league,
I
basically.
discovered the yeshiva world. And it was the first time I stepped into yeshiva.
I'm talking yeshiva league. That's what we affectionately call in the United States, like the modern Orthodox high schools that have floor hockey teams and basketball teams.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Meaning it's not like the yeshiva. It's not like Mir and Ner Yisrael. It's DRS and all the Hanks and Halbs and all that stuff. And you're like, it's so funny. You're in Israel and you see somebody. If you come from the yeshiva league and you're in Israel for the year, 98% because you've gone to camp together in schools and all of this.
Absolutely. And they're not actually spread out amongst that many institutions. Right?
Correct.
So I'm a friendly guy and I became friends with these other guys in Jerusalem. And through those friendships, I end up getting invited to Oraita. I get invited to Kotel. I get invited to Har Zion. I get invited to Esha Torah. I start spending a little bit of time, not necessarily learning in the Beit Midrash, but being exposed to the world of what those yeshivas look like. And then, of course, half of Jerusalem goes back to New York in one shape or another, whether it's YU or NYU or
and at
Columbia.
this point, I just want to jump in, and I'm sorry to ask it so bluntly. Are you Shomer Shabbos this year in Israel? Where are you in terms of your observance at this point?
That year, I'm beginning to play with Shabbos. I'm beginning to experience it in a way I've never experienced before. And then when I go back to New York, I start going to the JLIC Minyan, which is the modern Orthodox Minyan at Columbia University. Not for ideological reasons necessarily, but really for social reasons. I had a bunch of friends and that's where they were going. And it was the first time in my life that I felt that I had a peer group who was as excited about being Jewish and practicing Judaism as I was, and weren't necessarily all interested in being rabbis.
This is an important point, meaning when you grow up in the non-Orthodox world, and I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush, but I think there's definitely truth to this. It's sometimes seen the only way to express a seriousness for Jewish life is to become a rabbi. Not like to sit and get, I have a rabbi, but like to be a pulpit rabbi. It's the only way. And you end up like losing a lot of the community because like the best and the brightest go on to be rabbis. You don't have anybody necessarily sitting in the pews.
In the non-Orthodox world, very often those who are excited about Judaism or those who enjoy leading in a lay capacity are often at some point in their childhood tapped on the shoulder and said, you should really consider going into Jewish professional work, which makes complete sense because the Jewish world, the whole Jewish world, is desperate for leadership. But it doesn't always match the person. And because so often that transition happens, as you say so correctly, the professional class is very strong in their commitment, is very strong in their enthusiasm, but the lay class ends up almost being eroded to a certain extent.
There's a big gap.
Because all the ones who are really into it are on the bima.
This point that you're making is one of the most important points for people who don't fully understand the difference between the different denominations. People usually think the difference between the Orthodox world and the non-Orthodox world is about the rabbis. And the rabbis are definitely very different, and there's truth to that. But that's not really where the energy of the difference is coming from. The energy of the difference is always coming from the community, from the bottom up of the level of education of the masses. But I actually have this story that I heard from Tzvi Hirsch Weinreb. Tzvi Hirsch Weinreb said, imagine aliens come down from outer space and they land here and you introduce them to each denomination and you tell them what they're about. Reform is kind of a little softer when it comes to the law. Conservative is the law, but maybe a little bit more. And then there's Orthodox who are very strict. And then you show them the three different communities. So they would assume the Reform community, it's probably like everybody's got their own shtibel and shul. The conservative community is probably like just, you you have every community has one or two, and the Orthodox community is like very centralized. The strictest. It's probably
That's funny.
one shul from central casting, and the rabbis will allow one, and it's the opposite. I mean, you go to an Orthodox community, where do you daven? Down the block on Friday night, up the block on the morning, across the other side of the community during the week. The real differences come up not in the professional class, but in the lay style. So neither of your transitions was a product of the formal Jewish outreach movement, meaning there is a movement and there is a world called Jewish outreach, which is, what we call the Kiruv movement, which is an incredible effort to bring and introduce Judaism beyond the Orthodox community. But there's a formality to it. It has like a kind of, it's obviously driven to make people Orthodox. What's so fascinating to me is neither of you, it seems to me, I'm sure you've interacted, but neither of you are really a product of that. Both of you, your transformations were kind of organic.
Absolutely. I'll tell you that, we're painting with very broad brushes here. Obviously, we had many angels along the way, many of whom were professionals in what you would call traditional Kiruv institutions. But I had a particularly stark experience. My first time I ever went to a traditional Kiruv program, which was about a year and a half after I got back from the gap year in Israel.
You're like, let me give it a shot.
I also was going to study abroad at Hebrew University. And at the time, I had been working at a Jewish day school in Midtown Manhattan in college. And I'd been learning with a rabbi who worked for Meor, who happened to live across the street from that school.
Sure.
And he said to me, you're going to Hebrew University for the semester. You've been playing with Shabbos. You've been learning more. We've been learning together for a year. Why don't you go to this yeshiva called Machon Shlomo for a couple weeks? I think you'll enjoy it. And then anyways, you're going to be there why don't you go check it out? So I remember going.
Shout out, Machon Shlomo is run by Rav Beryl Gershenfeld.
100%.
An incredible person, incredible yeshiva. Yeah.
Fantastic yeshiva, fantastic institution. And I remember very clearly the language. It was the first time in my life I really heard that language of Baal Tshuva, of the guys walking around and speaking about how they were Baalei Tshuva.
Colloquially, let's be frank, we usually use that term to somebody who grew up outside the Orthodox community and now lives within the Orthodox community.
So I remember feeling very disassociated from the term because my whole life I felt very Jewish. In fact, not just was I very Jewish, but my friends called me rabbi in high school. I was always gravitating to the most Jewish pieces of the experiences that we're having. They weren't traditionally Orthodox, but they were very
deeply
Jewish and significant. And so more than any intellectual idea, which would come later, and thank God we spent a lot of time in traditional learning institutions.
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
But more than anything else, if I go back to that paradigm of kavua
and kavana
that we were speaking about with Yael, it really was the sociology of it that drew me in. And I think Yael and I connect so deeply on so many levels, but that's one of the pieces that motivates what it is that we're doing today and what it is that continues to inspire our Jewish lives is community, is that social experience, is that experiential nature of an embodied and lived Judaism that it's very hard to find outside the framework of traditional observance.
Exactly. And I want to get to what you're building now and how kind of these experiences have allowed you to address what I think is of the most, if not the most important issue that we have right now. But before we get to it, one of the things that I'm so moved by is kind of the trajectory of your story and exactly what you said now of why you almost don't self-identify. I don't think you'd be offended by it, but you don't self-identify as Baalei Teshuva because you don't draw a line in your past of now I'm for real Jewish and before I was not really Jewish. You said it yourself, and I want to kind of dive into this. You're still in touch with the Reform rabbi that you grew up with, and you still consider him a mentor and somebody who is of value, which I think is very powerful and really moving. Yeah, tell me a little bit. How do your friends, your family, how do they make sense of your transformation? They see you now, you have you read as very classically Israeli from how do they make sense of you? Are they like, were you kidnapped? Were you brainwashed? Like what? Like you were the head of BBYO. I'm curious if they look at you as like the one that got away, or like there's a sense of pride, or the sense of just like genuine confusion. Like you do you, we love what you're doing. We do not understand how this happened.
I think they see it and they see me and they totally understand how this happened. I mean, I think the makings of who I am now had been unfolding since I was an 8-year-old and said, I want to start saying Shema Yisrael every night and I want to start keeping some form of kashrut. It was always there for me. And like
You
you
said that as a
said,
young kid?
I did, yeah, when I was like 7 or 8
What
years
form
old, I
of
started.
kashrus? Did you were like, I'll accept triangle K, but but what
Like a learn as you go cautious. Like I really was,
you
I
wanted you
started basics, milk, no milk and meat, no trafe, things like that. And I think that kind of speaks to what you were saying on the organic development thing. It was, and Ben too, we learn and we integrate. That's sort of our approach that we've taken. And, maybe that's why we got along so well when we started meeting, but we really are.
learn and
We
integrate.
learn and integrate. We really believe in acting with integrity. And if I believe it, you're going to see it. You're going to see it in my clothing. You're going to see it in how I act. You're going to see it in where I live. That's just how I like to operate as a person. And thank God. And
That's very holy. I just want to say, because I like to draw it out. Learn and integrate. I've met a lot of people who learn and they struggle with integration.
mm,
I met a lot of people who integrate but never did the
mm,
learning. You know what I'm saying?
mm,
They know the movements, they know the sprach, as we would
mm-hmm,
say, the
mm-hmm,
language of the community. They don't really, it's very shaky what
mm-hmm.
exactly it is we're up to and we're doing. Learn and integrate. For you, I want to hear, Ben, like I was very moved and you kind of offered it. What does, you said Rabbi Leader, who's the head of the
Wilshire Boulevard
Wilshire
Temple.
Boulevard Reform Temple, you know, especially for the community you came from, I can imagine that you were extraordinarily promising. They had hopes that you could be the great white hope for the community of like, we're struggling here, and in the non-Orthodox world, particularly on American soil, there's a real need for leadership. And I assume, I don't like being of the people who just like check their watch, like, are there still non-Orthodox Jews? Let's wait for them to disappear. I think I think it's a very ugly feeling, and it's also wrong because we're all connected. We don't want any Jews to disappear. We want all the Jews. So, but for you, how did you maintain that relationship even where you are now? How did your friends react? And I'm really fascinated by this relationship you have with your childhood rabbi. How is it that he's not a little frustrated that like we had an awesome, and like we kind of like quote unquote like lost him, which I think is a term that we would use that term in the Orthodox world. Like if somebody was really promising and this amazing personality and all this great stuff, and then they choose to go to a different community, we complain about this. You grow up in a modern Orthodox community, it happens all the time, and then you become yeshivish. You go to Israel for the year and you come, and like a lot of parents are like rats. Like we
Mm,
we needed that one. We wanted
mm-hmm.
that one to say. How do you find your mentors and your friends relating to you through this transformation?
I'll tell you, one of the special things about growing up in fantastic educational institutions is the fact that the education you receive is really good. And when you grow up in a home that is so pro-Jewish and so pro-Israel, and we send, our children to Israel, and we have, my parents, even though they're not traditionally observant, are incredibly involved in the local community. It was not unusual on a weeknight to have board meetings taking place in our living room growing up. And I remember having a very similar conversation with my parents at one point and saying to them, you know, you sent us to Israel, you sent us to Jewish day school, you sent us to Jewish camp. What did you think was going to happen? We actually listened to what they were saying there, and there was some good stuff. And then we kept kind of following that path and tasting more and wanting to learn more, and we're still learning more. So as you said, I don't see it as a departure. I think one of the reasons that it's uncomfortable, not uncomfortable because we are Baalei Tshuva in a traditional sense, but it's not an identity that feels organically part of who we are, is
Because the whole
because there was never a light switch moment.
a break from your
Many Baalei
past.
Tshuva you meet, and we have many friends. There was the self before, or the life I was living before, and then I went to yeshiva or seminary, or got invited to that rabbi's
Sure.
Shabbos table, and my life completely changed. Which is great if that's what
Beautiful.
works and fabulous.
But that's not
But for us, that was never the story. It's been a slow, gradual evolution. And when you ask about our friends, when you ask about our families, it wasn't like we came home one day, they hadn't seen us for years, and all of a sudden, I'm wearing a kippah, Yael's wearing mipachat, and our whole lives are different. They've been part of the ride. Even though they aren't necessarily observant in the way that we are observant today, our parents are totally supportive, and they have all in their own ways increased their commitment and their interest in traditional observance in Israel, in Jewish life and living as a result of their association with us. And so it's really a mutual journey that we're all on together. It's not a departure from what was.
I love that answer. I want to ask a question, and I'm deliberately going to phrase it in a little bit more of an adversarial way.
Mhm.
I am playing devil's advocate. This is not for anybody in the room. This is from pushback that I've received from within the community, and I kind of want to hear both of your answers. You know, I have spoken positively. I've also spoken with many non-Orthodox leaders and people, not because I was trying to secretly make them Orthodox, because I think that they have things that can be valuable to see and to say. And not always, but sometimes I have voices. They're very often loud, and they will criticize very strongly. Say, "How can you do that? How can you have a conversation or even have a frame that speaks positively of non-Orthodox Jews? Is especially a non-Orthodox rabbi? Isn't this the movement that has been destroying tradition and tearing things down? And shouldn't our posture towards the non Orthodox world be a little bit more adversarial, be a little bit more I'll say angry at the very least so people don't get confused. So there is a clear line so people don't get confused and that they should know that the world that you are from to no fault of your own, again, I'm speaking in devil's advocate to no fault of your own, um, but we don't want more people going there. We want more people being Torah true, etc., etc. You don't have that posture, thank God, honestly, between me and you, but I know people who do. What would you respond from somebody who, 10 years ago, you were a part of that world, or maybe 15 years ago, you were right center in that world? How would you respond from voices within from the Orthodox world who speak, and I think they're not I understand where they're coming from. We need clear boundaries. We need clear divisions. We can't talk positively, about the religious life in the non-Orthodox. What are you doing, David? You're messing up the whole thing. How would you respond or really make sense of the posture that each of you have? And I'd love to hear from both of you.
I think that people within those organizations need to be real with themselves and say, am I doing everything I can as a Jew to ensure that this survives? All the more so among the leadership. Um, and it's a real call to action. Sometimes it's not from a malicious place whatsoever, but rather lack of basic knowledge. And the more that these institutions can cultivate education from within, and I'm talking like actual sitting down with the books and understanding where does this tradition come from? What are we supposed to be doing? And whether they're preaching the observance of halacha or, departing from that. Obviously, we've personally made a choice to very much embrace observance and orthodoxy. But where these organizations or, sects of Judaism are not embracing that, they need to at least know what they're talking about. And sometimes that's just lost. Within the Jewish world, we have no choice but to band together because as we're experiencing, unfortunately, more and more, we have a lot more enemies than we think. And if we start splicing and dicing within and tearing ourselves apart, look where that's gotten us in the past. I mean, we're just coming out of the month of Av here, so that's not such a distant memory. At the same time, we need to hold ourselves to higher standards across the board. And I think that call spans across all denominations.
I appreciate that very much. Ben, what would you respond to somebody who would critique your posture?
As I'm hearing you ask the question, I'm actually thinking about another dividing line issue that could be phrased, replace a few words here and there, which is the question of living in Israel today or not living in Israel today. In the Jewish community who doesn't live in Israel, and how could you not live in Israel? And where we're from, we hear these conversations and these arguments all the time. What I would say to that question and what I would say to your question here is it could be that there was a time, could be that the post World War II generation needed clear definition. It needed Musser and those types of boundaries to be
Very clear
drawn
demarcations.
that separated those paths. But I don't think that's the nature of where we are today. I've never met a Jew who grew up in that world and who entered on their own volition into the Orthodox world because of a guilt argument.
Because some rabbi yelled at them and said, "This is."
And if they did, they didn't last very long. And the same could be said about Israel. I've never met someone who actually moved to Israel and made Aliyah
Somebody was
because
yelling at them on social
someone was
media.
yelling on them, or they felt that this is the Zionistic thing to do and we have to rebuild the land. It has to come from a place that's internal. That's the generation we live in today. And even if it doesn't, even if the influence that might push you in that direction could be varied, the end result is going to be, does it speak to you? Does it fill you with warmth? Are the people in your surrounding community embracing? Is it authentic to the type of person you want to be in the world? Does it make you actually a happier person? You know, one of the most amazing things you find is when you spend time in certain types of Baalei yeshivas, you often find people walking around very serious, very serious. Their faces are scrunched, and
Yeah.
they're very focused on learning all the rules and trying to do all the right things and learning the right way and pronunciating all the words correctly. And that makes total sense.
I like that you mispronounced pronouncing. You call it pronunciating.
Pronouncing all the words correctly, and that makes complete sense. There is an overwhelming amount to learn, but at the end of the day, when you see the most dynamic and embracing kiruv rabbis out there, the one trait that they all share is a simchas chaim, is an
A joy
overflowing,
for life itself.
bubbly personality that just exudes how wonderful this lifestyle is. At the end of the day, that's what touches hearts and souls. Giving people a hard time particularly from a vantage point that isn't from that place, it doesn't go very far.
Can I ask you a little bit more directly? I mean, you mentioned it. I'm just curious, your relationship with your childhood rabbi, and you called him a mentor, which I actually found extraordinarily moving. What do you find when you keep in touch? What do you find yourselves talking about together?
I'll tell you, it's not just my childhood rabbi. I mean, I have many mentors from the
Orthodox world.
traditionally
Yeah,
Orthodox
sure.
world who have been privileged to learn and grow from. Of course, many mentors in the more traditional world now. Um, I think at some point in my journey, I realized that I'm a big boy. I can put on my big boy pants, so to speak,
Yes.
and I can be in conversation and friendship and dialogue with people who I don't believe 100% or don't agree with 100% of what they are or who they are or what they stand for, and still learn a tremendous amount from them. If you want to go more specific,
No, I like that you said I'm a big boy. I can be allowed to exist in my own life without like a chaperone, like a religious chaperone right behind. Oh no, don't talk to that guy. Like don't go over there. Like
and I should say that it works on both sides of the spectrum. Meaning, one of my favorite
Tell
things
me.
to do during Bein Hazmanim is to go and sit in the Mir Yeshiva with my Rebbe, Rabbi Moshe Jinian, and learn Gemara. I don't live in that world. That's not the community that you would associate me with, but I love it and I appreciate it and I see how much there is to gain from it. And I can be there. I can, respect it and benefit from it and still go back to Katamon and be a bit more
I think the key
broad.
factor is what exactly you said, and I wish it wasn't as gendered, but I think it applies. I'm a big boy, meaning learning how to feel at home in your own skin, in your own life. If the starting point is stable and firm and strong, and you know what it is who you are, there's so much more room to engage, to interact, because when you're in unstable and where you are as a person, then every person you meet is a referendum on your
Mhm.
lifestyle.
Right.
Well, why are you firmer than me? Why are you less firm than me?
Mhm.
Because you're not stable. When a person's stable, when the change is organic and real, so you meet somebody who is colloquial, a little bit more from or a little bit less from than you. Okay, you're doing you. We could talk. It's not a break. It's not a rupture, and that's
Mhm.
really the theme.
One of the things I remember so powerfully from that first experience I ever had at Machon Shlomo, you mentioned Rabbi Gershenfeld before, is in one of the opening schmoozes he gave during that program. He
Did
said,
you end up going to Machon Shlomo?
I was there for just a couple weeks.
Okay.
It was like, I think
You
it
didn't
was,
get, like, kicked out, right?
no, no.
Okay, you just wanna
It was a winter break program.
have a very nice relationship with Rav Gershon. You're like, "We kicked that guy out, and you had him on?" I wanna make sure that's not the story.
I remember during one of the opening schmoozes, he said to the chevra there, he said, to be a healthy Baal Tshuva, you have to be a Baal Bechira. You have to be a master over making your own decisions. If you just embrace and just spoon feed what is being given over to you, that's not a recipe for being a healthy, well rounded person. And that always had a very deep impact on me in both directions, as we're saying. And I think we all, in a certain sense, have a true north inside of ourselves. Sometimes we swing to the right, sometimes we swing to the left, but our internal clocks,
We
so
know
to speak, know what's right. And
each of us has a true north. I love that. And we really do, and sometimes to find the true north, you have to spend a little time in a little bit off to one side, a little bit off to the other, just to know what home
Mhm.
feels like.
I want to be clear. I wouldn't recommend to students today or to people in the community necessarily that
To jump
anyone
around.
should take the path that we've taken necessarily, because that's the path that we had. But nevertheless, I'm incredibly grateful and appreciative for that path because it has allowed us to really taste and see so much beauty in the Jewish world. There are very genuine, incredible people trying very hard to spread and, in certain cases here in the US, save Judaism. And I just want to always be a force of applauding and encouraging those efforts. And I never, God forbid, want to be amongst those trying to put them down.
Amen.
Oh, I think there's also one other angle to it, which is that, and it might be known, but sometimes taken for granted, the barrier to entry for religious life can be high. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot to know. There's an etiquette. There's different things. And I know for myself, it took a while to get into that and really learn what's on the bookshelf. And I was able to study at a handful of different places that spanned the spectrum about Pardes, Nishmat, Migdalos, MRC, and even Neve for a little bit. We got to dip
So
in
you got to
all
taste.
of these places, which was phenomenal. Like Ben said, I don't know that every person needs to go to all these different places, but it gave an experience to what these different worlds of Judaism can look like, which has been tremendously beneficial. And at the same time, I know the barrier to entry can be high. So when we talk about what does that look like for the broader Jewish world outside of Orthodoxy, it doesn't mean that all of the responsibility is on the Orthodox Jews to include, because that's not how it works. It's a two-way,
Mhm.
multiple way relationship between these different branches of Judaism. But it's important to remember, especially among Orthodoxy, there is a barrier to entry. And as much as we can be inclusive and inviting and welcoming and really showing Orthodox Judaism in a beautiful way that's inspiring, that's what brings people in. I know that was the case for me when I started to see the colors and the different textures of Judaism, especially in Israel. That lit something up for me where I said, wow, I can see myself among those people. And it was from that place of a ratzon that I felt like I really want to,
Jump in.
to
Yeah.
run towards it.
Let me ask you before, and I want to get, because we haven't even touched upon what you're doing now in Israel, which is just so jaw dropping. But my last question, in terms of your own personal journey, you talk about the barrier to entry into Orthodox life, and you really have an important perspective on that. What were there any barriers that you found particularly difficult for each of you? I'm actually very curious. I would love to do a full episode on this, and it's not for now, but as an Orthodox Jew, I am always kind of like a little surprised when I see women able to fully kind of culturally transition and move within the modesty world,
Mm.
which I think of anything is extremely restrictive. It basically tells you how, and you're living in Israel, it's really, really like hot. And even within the Orthodox world, there isn't quite a strong consensus. There's like we're moving towards an idea of
Mhm.
what exactly are the boundaries
Mhm.
of modesty. But I'm curious to hear from each of you, but what were the barrier of entries that you remember the most as being most difficult? And if you have like a moment to just how you were able to integrate so organically the world of, I want to call it modesty, but I'm really talking about tznius,
Mhm.
like, the cultural world of Orthodox dress.
The cultural world of Orthodox dress really is such a topic, and it's so important. And I think I'll give two answers. On one hand, coming from the non Orthodox world, at some point, I'm doing these different interviews and things, and I start to look around at the difference that exists between how men need to dress for interviews and how women need to dress for interviews. And it sort of, without going into too much detail, you can kind of imagine what that looks like. It's a lot more revealing on the women's side. And you have to ask yourself as, at a young woman when I'm thinking about all this, why is it necessary to reveal oneself physically when that's really not the point here? So that was sort of a push. And more importantly, though, is on the pull side is what type of society are we creating? What type of society do I want my children to be in? And the answer to that is that it's one that values the sanctity of a couple. And by dressing in a way that says, I have what to save, I'm preserving that for my family life is so important in terms of what that creates between a couple, the dynamic that creates between different genders within society, and also for what children see in the home. I am a very strong proponent for modest dress, and it's amazing to be in a time too where that is taking on a very beautiful essence to it,
Yeah, it
and
has a
there's
lot more
more to share.
personality now.
Very much. So I feel actually very fortunate to be part of a society that values that. Um, but as you said, that comes with a mindset shift, a big mindset shift of what is the goal here? What are we trying to build? We're trying to build families and we're trying to build a society.
Were there barriers to entry that you felt like, I don't know that I'll be able to ever master this? Or
Mm.
like when it was first introduced to you, being like,
Yeah.
like I can see like
I didn't
every day? How many times?
right.
When exactly? Like
So
what?
I didn't grow up in a society with hair coverings, for example. That just was not part of the non-Orthodox world. Now, you know, in our households, raising from birth, FFB children
FFB is
from
from birth,
birth,
people who raised within the
you know,
Orthodox world.
that
Sure.
well, we have diversity in our community, but that's something that they will know as that's the first thing that they knew is women
Mhm.
wearing hair coverings. Um, but for me, it was. I think there's always a leap at some extent. You can't have 100% certainty about something that hasn't happened yet. this is going to be the right thing. You're 95, 98% certain. And there's always that moment of taking a leap, and you need to believe that Hashem's going to catch you. And so that's where we're able to lean on the tradition. This has been working for thousands of years. There's a reason for it. We have to trust our sages and our rabbis on some level. And I know that might just sound a little bit kitschy when I'm saying, but it's honestly true. When you look around the broader world and see so many things that are not working, you have to look at what is working.
I couldn't agree more. I don't look at necessarily the rabbis or the sages. I look at our community,
Mm.
meaning I look the community. It's working. Is it perfect? No, no, no. Community by definition is not perfect.
Right.
It's not one
And well, and
individual.
maybe even on that topic, I would even rephrase that further to say, and we have to actually look at the women who have been upholding that, because on this particularly female topic, I think you have to look at who the
Yeah.
women that have actually been holding that up. And a lot of the practice of modesty is exactly that. It's in the home. It's not in the limelight, and
No.
that's where that comes through. And we have to trust and embrace that and support one another in that.
I'm curious, Ben, for you, barriers to entry, things that were kind of difficult because your intro was so organic and so social. It feels like you kind of learned the movements of Judaism with just almost unconsciously because you learned the movement. Was there anything that was introduced to you that you were like, I don't know about this one. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get to like any in terms of that introduction barriers to entry.
I'll tell you honestly, even though today I've learned to embrace it and sort of wear it on my shoulder much more so, is that when you enter the traditional world, you realize that one of the most beautiful pieces is the primacy that's placed on education and Torah learning, and specifically on Talmud study. Now, I'm dyslexic. I grew up with tremendous amounts of summer school and challenges learning to read and to write and grammar and all of those things. And so adding that to Hebrew in the opposite direction, tracing on a Gemara page is not a simple feat, to say the least. And I remember one of my rabbis saying at a certain point, there's just certain things that it's tuchus knowledge, meaning
What do
it's
you mean by
just
that?
a amount of time that you're sitting on your tuchus and banging it into yourself. And that has been true to a certain extent. Now, if you say to me, Ben, are you God's gift to Talmud study? The answer is no.
Not yet.
Not yet. Very good. Not yet. And I've learned to understand that while it's incredibly important and it's something that I spend time on every single day, I may not ever be as comfortable or as fluent in that world to the same extent that someone who grew up from age elementary school learning Bava Basra. But as long as I'm involved in it and as long as I'm putting in a lot of work, that doesn't mean that I don't have a place to contribute in the traditional world. And because of the other experiences I have been privileged to have, integrating those into my broader toolkit, so to speak, can really create something that is valuable in and of itself, despite not having a traditional yeshiva background.
This is not based on any scholarship whatsoever, but I could only imagine, and after spending some time with both of you, um, the same way that we sometimes talk about people who are blind, developing or like really fine tuning their sense of hearing. I could imagine that somebody who struggles with dyslexia, as you just shared, which, yeah, that would make Talmud study, that would make second language acquisition a little difficult. I probably, if you had told me that, I probably would have said, you know what, you should become a rabbi in Israel. I probably would not have recommended that, but that's beautiful because you never asked, which is really so amazing. But I imagine that the dyslexia, you honed in on other social skills that doesn't require, line by line decoding of letters, which is really the perfect transition to talk about where you are now. And this is really why we decided to talk. I got a call from a two-time guest on 1840, somebody who I consider one of the genuine great living tzaddikim, the righteous people of our generation. He'll kill me for saying so, because that's not how he introduces himself, but it's my dearest friend, and Chavrusa from way back when, Rav Yosef Bronstein. Rabbi Bronstein, who wrote an incredible book on the Lubavitcher Rebbe. I believe it is right over there, Engaging the Essence, and has done incredible work on Rav Kook. He's been on twice, both to talk about Rav Kook and to talk about the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He called me up and said, I have this young couple.
And working with his father-in-law on Rav Soloveitchik's
Absolutely,
shiurim.
the Rishimas on Kiddushin that he put together. But I got a call from Yosef Bronstein. He said, I have this young couple. They have a remarkable story, and they're doing the most important thing in the world, and that is they're building community in Israel, which right now, in this moment, if you were to ask me, this is the holiest work on earth. But I want to phrase the question in a deliberately, maybe more controversial way, and you'll say this. We heard your story. You're from, you have the background that you have. What on earth would compel you, people who didn't have the yeshiva league background, didn't have the NCSY Kollel and studying Gemara and learning all the ins and outs of everything since you're a kid, to go to Israel and to establish community? I associate people who establish communities in Israel, wildly successful American pulpit rabbis. That's one wildly successful. Rabbi Riskin, you had hundreds and hundreds of families, and now you're going to say, I'm going to go to Israel. Okay, maybe that could work. Or somebody who's like native to Israel and knows the ins and outs. And I'm saying this in like kind of a deliberately insulting way. Like, who do you think you have a thriving community, not in the boondocks, not in some, desert small, in Katamon, which is like prime real estate. I could list 20 rabbis who spent like, I would dream. I didn't know there was an opening. Nobody emailed me. And here you are building community in Israel. Here's the question I want to pose to you. What do you how is it that you are being successful at this in Israel? Meaning, you're not Israeli. You didn't have a thriving congregation in America. You're basically, and I'm saying this from where I'm sitting, kind of like unknowns to the community. You weren't raised within, and here you are doing the dream of what I would say every rabbi in the world. What is it that I'm missing, and what do you attribute to your success? What's the need right now of building community? I didn't. If somebody would have emailed me, say, "Hey, community in Katamon looking for rabbi, check out the salary. Okay, works good." Maybe I would have considered it. I didn't see it go around. Obviously, that's not how this started. What do you attribute the success, or even how you approach community building in Israel? Ben, we could start with you.
Well, I'll answer the question by telling you two stories as way of background. How did we get here? So when I was 18 and I was on my gap year in Israel, somehow through a odd series of circumstances, I got connected with Rabbi Riskin. And I'll never forget it. I got a call one afternoon on a Wednesday afternoon from his legendary secretary, Mickey Mervis. And she says to me, Rabbi Riskin will be in Jerusalem tomorrow. Would you like to have lunch with him? Or you can come for Shabbos to Efrat. Now, I had no idea where Efrat was. I had no idea really who Rabbi Riskin was. And I certainly wasn't traditionally observant. But I was 18 and I was there for the experience. And
You're
so I
like a
said,
kid.
sure,
Yeah.
I'll come to Efrat. So I had the privilege of spending a Shabbos with Rav Riskin. And when anyone who ever encountered Rav Riskin in Efrat, back in the day, he used to walk from Simcha to Simcha on Friday night and from Simcha to Simcha on Shabbat morning. So we went, I think, to maybe 7 shuls on Friday night, and he's wearing his bekasha, and people are
Sure.
coming up to him in the street kissing his hand, which sort of gave me an indication of, wow, this is really a very
Curious
special
guy.
guy. And then I come home, and to my great astonishment, it's me, Rav Riskin, and his wife, Vicky. And it's just the three of us having dinner together. And I'll never forget that evening. And he told me a lot of incredible things that have always stuck with me. But I remember asking him specifically about Efrat and about what was going on there and if that was ever part of his imagination or did it just happen? Did this just happen? And he said to me, in Israel, if you want to be a community rabbi, you have to build it. And that has always stuck in the back of my mind. Now, flash forward 10 years. Yael and I are just finishing up a year on Shlichut in Abu Dhabi, where we had the privilege of spending a year
An incredible story of its own that we don't have time to get into.
totally different topic.
Yeah.
But we had the privilege of spending a year at a very interesting synagogue in Abu Dhabi just after the Abraham Accords. And we knew we were ready to go back to Israel. And we get a call from our dear Rebbe, Rav Shlomo Katz, telling us that he's opening a machon for...
I need to say, because you mentioned his name, it's crazy that I've never had Rav Shlomo Katz in 1840, and I think he would know this. True, I'm not going to go on. I have great, great love and admiration for Shlomo Katz. He gets what's happening right now. But please continue.
Amen. That makes 3 of us in the room and many, many more out there. And Rav Shlomo tells us that he's opening a machon designed for not just learning his hashkafa of Torah Eretz Yisrael and Chassidut, but he's also bringing in a tremendous scholar who at the time we didn't know, but now is thankfully a dear Rebbe and friend of ours, Rav Yosef Bronstein. And their goal was not just to have a community kollel in the amazing community that they've built in Efrat, but really to spend 2 years giving Avrechim an opportunity to learn the playbook of what they've built there. Not in the sense of trying to replicate Shirat David, which is the name of the community that Rav Shlomo and his chevra has built in Efrat, but in the sense of replicating the concept of seeing what can be possible within Israel. And not just what's possible, but really what's needed. And so, thank God, we had an opportunity of living in Rav Shlomo's community for 2 years. And during that period of time, not only did we learn and develop an amazing appreciation for who Rav Shlomo Katz is and who Rav Dr. Yosef Bronstein is and all of their incredible Torah and contribution. And so we had the privilege of being there and not just learning this Torah and being engulfed in the community, but really being inspired and given a patch to go out and do something. And we knew it was 2 years from the outset. And towards the end of the second year, we began thinking about what is our next step. And you've heard now a bit of our story. And I think we did a calculation. And I think before we moved back to Katamon 2 years ago, we had moved almost every single year of our lives since we had been 18. And Yael and I knew that we really ideally wanted to go to a place where we could move and hopefully set roots and be there. And my chavrusa from the Machon, Rav Yonatan Atias, who Rav Yonatan and his wife Karen are our partners in this community that we're creating in Katamon, who had been friends with we had been friends with them before we had moved to Efrat. They also were interested in moving back to Katamon. And Rav Shlomo said to Yonatan and I one day, he said, "No, guys, you should go and you should start something." And after a lot of deliberation and a lot of thought, Rav Yonatan and I said, okay, we're going to give it a shot. And so we went to a few more than 10 people, but we got 10 people to give us $10,000 to give us a 1-year runway to try to see if
10 people to each give you $10,000.
Correct.
Okay, good.
To give us a 1-year runway to try to see if we could whip up what...
Get this off the ground.
Rav Shlomo and his chevra call a ruach sara.
Translate that for our audience. A tempest storm, a storm that could move the status quo and kind of build something fresh, like a tornado goes through, like everything has its place and it moves everything around, which is good. Yeah,
correct. And now you might be saying to yourself, well, okay, you're going to Katamon, and Katamon, thank God, is
the prime neighborhood. It's
perhaps one of the most densely populated Jewish marketplaces in the world.
To me, it's like two young, innocent, naive Baalei Teshuva who are thinking, okay, we did our 2-year stint in the kollel. We're going to open up a shul. Where should we move to? And they're like, you know what? We'll open up a shul in Woodmere. I'm like, what? Like, what? Like, Katama, like, aren't there like 1 billion shuls there? And like I would be, and I grew up, I would be too intimidated to start anything. I wouldn't even know what it means to start something.
So the answer is yes, and that's exactly the opportunity. If you think about Adam Smith and the Wealth of Nations, that in a densely populated capitalistic marketplace, that means that there's opportunity for tremendous specification. Now, we weren't opening up a minyan just to have another minyan because, as you said, thank God there are
A million places
a
to
million
catch a
places
mincha.
to catch a mincha. There are plenty of minyanim. That's not what was needed.
What's so this is the key question, and this is I want to hear from both of you, but you're going to continue, and then I want to hear what what is the need for what is Israel missing in terms of community right now?
I'll say it to you in one word, which is the name of our community, which is Pnima. The name of our shul is Pnima Jerusalem. And I think in so many ways, the word Pnima, which means inward, which is directional in its orientation, which wears it on its sleeve what it is that we represent, tells the whole story. If you want to say, what does Israel need? We can have a whole conversation about how Jewish communal institutions have established themselves over the course of the last 80, 75 years in Israel, and why the institutional synagogue didn't really catch on in
You have
the
this
same
theory? I
way.
mean, let's talk.
Sure. So
Why in Israel? It's interesting. I'm not a big community guy. It's not my I'm very close with our shul here. You could probably see it out the window. I'm very close with our rabbi, Rabbi Benny Crone, who's actually doing this. He's building a community in Israel. So I'll make sure that he gets your number. But I sometimes downplay in America how much we rely on community, and I think I go too far to the other extreme. But in Israel, there's no like it's not like it is here where like this is like that there's an energy revolving around a central location. It's like everyone's making Shabbos for themselves. Why do you think Israel developed that way?
if you want to diagnose it, I think on one foot, it comes from a certain socialistic societal background foundation.
Ah,
I think
interesting.
it also is a byproduct of the rabbanut and the lack of church and state separation in
Where
Israel.
people are like, the last thing I want is another rabbi in my life.
Not necessarily. I mean, there could be some of that. I don't.
Yeah.
I don't want to necessarily go
No.
there. I want to say that the concept of Judaism as an extracurricular activity, that just like any other extracurricular activity in my life that I need to invest in and is not a social welfare benefit, requires
Ah,
investment. Whereas Judaism obviously is not an extracurricular activity, it's everything. But the way that certain state institutions developed, Judaism, the Rabbanut, Kashrus, many of these things almost are social welfare entitlement
yeah.
benefits in
Yes.
Israel. And that's actually one of the most attractive thing for many people who make Aliyah, the
They don't have to
concept
pay
of I don't have to
tuition.
pay tuition, or in their mind they think I'm not necessarily gonna have to pay shul dues in the same way that I do
Exactly.
here. And while there's a lot of truth and a lot of good that's come out of that, there's also a big downside, which is the fact that for many of those people, and I think I should also specify that the people who feel it the most are those who are olim, those
Yes.
who are moving to Israel, because rarely does a person move to Israel if they have not had an external Jewish institution in their lives that was, in many ways, the center of their Judaism. And that could have been a shul, it could have been a school, it could have been a camp, it could have been a JCC. Whatever it was, those institutions, 9 times out of 10, were also led by full time professional leaders who viewed themselves as being in the customer service industry. That model, I can count on my hand how many full time rabbis I know in Jerusalem who their only salary, their only parnasa, the only thing they
It's coming
do
from community
is
building.
coming from the synagogue in which they work. For all of these different reasons, even when you have plenty of synagogues, there are not enough institutions where the rabbi, who could be the greatest rabbi in the world,
But a rabbi who knows your name, who would bring up
it could be all those things, but for factors that are outside of their control, they don't have the opportunity to invest themselves in the communal work in the way that they would like to, because very justifiably they're running around and they're teaching at different yeshivas, or they're working for different organizations in order to be able to live like a mensch. And part of the product that we're creating, and part of the movement and the vision that was instilled in us by Rav Shlomo and some of the other, and even going back to Rav Riskin, was to say it's needed to have a full-time community rabbi. It's needed to take that institutional model. We're not replicating America and Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Israel is its own society with its own conventions, with its own nature. And there's not going to be a one size fits all model. But there does need to be a consensus that investing into community, investing into anything in life, you get so much more out than if you just take. And while there are so many, what I would call sort of shtiblachs, there are many,
Or some of the B'nai yeshivas. That's what they call a lot of them.
or there are many places where you can go daven, and it's very transactional.
Yeah.
And there are very few places, and hopefully there are more and more. And I think that this project that Yael and I and Rav Yonatan and his wife Karen are privileged to be part of is actually a piece of a larger vanguard that's beginning to take root in Israel, which is a recognition, particularly amongst Olim, that it's time to acknowledge that the Jewish experience outside of Israel for the last how many hundreds of years yielded a lot of really valuable results. And one of those really valuable results was the concept of the Jewish institution, of the professionally run Jewish institution.
I want to just jump in and say something, because if you're still listening to this conversation, which is just enthralling, but I think people are going to think that the reason why we included your story in our annual Teshuva series is because of the first half of the conversation. And the second half of the conversation is just like, what are they up to now? Like, just fill it in. It's the opposite. I wanted you on. I didn't know the first half of your story. That came much later. I think the teshuva that we need now is taking the lessons of American Jewry, particularly the last 4 generations where we have been in America, the primary or the majority population. That's just beginning to shift and tilt towards Israel now. But for 4 generations after the Holocaust, there was no Europe to look towards, and there was American Judaism, and we were kind of on our own. Separation between church and state, and we needed to figure out, like, what's the model of Yiddishkeit that is going to survive here. And we built institutions and we built synagogues, and we took 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, experimenting. And I think this moment is to take specifically the lessons that we learned on American soil, and actually now we're finally ready to bring them to the land of Israel. And it's not that Israel is a blank slate. Israel desperately needs some of the lessons, not all, but some of the lessons that we've learned on American soil. So I want to dig a little deeper, and if you'll allow me, Yael, like, one of the things that I would imagine that is hard to create community in Israel is it's much more diffuse, meaning when you select a community in America, you can almost figure out what community makes sense when they're in. Give me a 10th grader, and I could probably narrow it down to the 3 or 4 communities
Mhm.
that they're going to live. I could ask a bunch of questions: in town versus out of town,
Mhm.
modern Orthodox, yeshivish. Do you want? You could figure out the nuances fairly easily
Mhm.
on American soil. In Israel, like, everyone, I mean, this is always true, but like, everyone has a story. You don't have the sorting institutions of the same way that, a graduate from this high school is going to want this kind of shul
Mhm.
and this kind of synagogue. How did you figure out and kind of learn how to wed the idea with the actual lived community in Israel? How did you develop something? You know, there needs to be a symbiotic relationship between the congregation, the community, and what's being built.
Mhm.
So I'm curious for you, and I'm sure all of you and the other couple for sure all played a little bit of role, but Give me an example of like when there was like maybe a fork in the road or trying to figure out you had a decision to make. What kind of community are we? How did you go about figuring that out?
Well, I think it's important to put a little chronology on the start of the shul. So the shul began actually in our living room. We just jumped in. Like
You
this was
trust falled
this
into this
was
whole thing.
this was
Like,
such a dream. I actually even want to say first, kind of hard to everything. Like it's really such a zchut to be building this. I can't even imagine. This is beyond our wildest dreams. And with that, there are certain moments in life where Hashem passes you the ball and you got to catch it and you got to run with it. And that's what we're doing. This has been bootstrapping and we're just going. We're responsive to the community, the people who show up, the feedback and everything. So this started in our living room. We fit in as many people as we could. And we every week, okay, we gotta put signage on these doors and, put the bathroom sign over there and whatever it is. Putting all of our Sidurim, just borrowing from people at the beginning. I mean, we were just running with it with an idea and a vision and enthusiasm and just all hands on deck. Um, and we saw who was showing up and we saw the type of community that was being built. And I know Ben will have what to add to this in terms of people who have come in, but we started offering different types of programming and really seeing what landed. We had amazing sharing. I mean, one of the amazing sluts that's come out of this experience is we've been able to we were able to really be a part and make your home a meeting place for the sages. We've been able to have a lot of our teachers and giants in our lives come in to teach us shir, and that attracted different people. So we were able to see are these type of events landing? Are these sharing landing? Is it more this and that? So we started with Shabbos and we've been able to expand. At some point, we outgrew that space. So I guess that wasn't exactly a fork in the road as much as just a natural progression of needing new space. And Ben can speak to that experience of kind of going to the second stage. But we, at that point, sort of were cultivating a community. And there was just all of a sudden this amazing wildfire moment where I think it's partially the offering, and I think it's also just the people in the room saying, wow, I really want to be here. I want to bring a friend. This is electric, and I just want to be part of what's going on. I mean, as people find, there's building the Kli, and there's also the people within it finding each other, and that compels them back week after week, and the energy just sort of becomes a magnet in itself. Um, and that has contributed to amazing growth that we're just doing everything we can to keep it going, to stay responsive, to try to stay a few steps ahead of it and running with it.
in what ways, if at all, do you think your community does differ from what you find in America? And I'm sure there must be American rabbis with this plan because so many people, so many Jewish leaders in America, thank God, have announced that they plan on making Aliyah and they want to get people, there's a development or whatever it is. And I'm sure at least one, two have reached out to you. What do you think is the misconception, or maybe I don't want to use a strong word, not a mistake, but like, what do you think they might be missing in that as the classical trajectory of starting communities in Israel versus what you're doing, which is like literally trust falling backwards and just hope that there's a community there to catch you?
I want to be careful not to over pathologize the role of what Pnima is and
Sure.
where it lands. I think that while thank God so far it's been beyond our wildest dreams, and now we're just davening to have the kalim to help it grow in the best way we
Sure.
can together with our partners. We are taking a very proactive approach that might not actually fit in a traditional Anglo environment. As you mentioned a few moments ago, one of the beautiful pieces about Israel is the diversity of people who find themselves there. Unlike certain communities you might find in the US, where there's a certain self selection bias that ends up cultivating
Sure.
an element of homogeneity around the constituents you might find in the same type of synagogue. In our neighborhood, we have Jews from Yemen, we have Sfardim, we have Mizrahim, we have Yeshivish, we have Haredi, we have Hasidim, we have American, Anglo, modern Orthodox, we have everything in between and non-observant. And as a result, we made a conscious decision early on that our goal is not to be a one size fits all. It's not needed and it wasn't going to be successful. We very clearly defined ourselves from the outset as saying what it is that we are, which really goes back to the name. I remember my partner, Rav Yonatan, we were debating what to call this community when we were just starting it. And he went to actually to Rav Kluger in Beit Shemesh,
Ah,
Big Tzaddik,
sure.
and he shared with him a few name possibilities. And I remember he said that Rav Kluger, when he said Pnima, he smiled and he said, for my chevra, it wouldn't necessarily work, but for your chevra and what you're trying to attract, that's perfect because it very clearly signifies who we are. For example, we are not an express minion. If you want an express minion in our neighborhood, thank
Plenty to
God
find.
there are plenty to find. Now, we're not the slowest minion around, but we're very much focused on creating an incredible tefillah experience. And I would say that both my partner, Rav Yonatan, who's a incredibly talented musician and artist who has his own band, and also our chazan, who we brought in about 3 months into the program and into the project, Yehuda Solomon from the Moshav band,
Ooh.
who happened to both be a very good friend of Rav Shlomo, but is also Los Angeles
Oh, sure.
Ole after 25 years. Mina Shamayim ended up moving down the street about 2 years ago from us. We became friendly with him and his family. And between that combination of really professional Baalei Tefillot who are creating an environment that is, I don't want to be overly hubristic, but I challenge anyone to find a tefillah that is as inspiring and powerful as it is between these two chazans. We also decided very early on that we're going to be speaking English, which is not an uncontroversial decision. To the
Sure.
contrary, one of the biggest pushbacks that we get is people coming up to us and saying, "Why you're in Israel? Why aren't you
Why?
speaking Hebrew? Why are you only speaking English?" Now, my partner Yonatan is Israeli. He grew up in Harnof in Jerusalem. I grew up, you know, a little bit of my background now. My Hebrew is fine. His Hebrew is excellent. We could be speaking Hebrew, but and I think it was Rav Shlomo Katz who really helped us understand this, that when you're speaking with a community for whom the vast majority, and it's not exclusively Anglo Olim, we do have many native born Hebrew speakers who come. It's growing actually. But when you're speaking predominantly to Olim who have made the jump of moving to Israel, they're spending their days haggling with Bituach Leumi, the social services, with the Kupat Chulim, the medical facilities. They're on the street. They're ordering taxis. They're living their life in Hebrew, and some of them have great Hebrew, and some of them don't. And it's hard to move to a place like that. When you come to shul, we had to ask ourselves very clearly, what's the goal here? Is the goal to sit through a Devar Torah in Hebrew so you can sort of give yourself
We're
you know,
real.
a
We're
pat on the back and say I sat through a Hebrew Devar Torah even though I didn't understand most of it? Or is the goal to open your soul to hearing something that actually touches you? Is the goal of synagogue of tefillah to be an ear miklat of sorts in your
place
life,
of
a
refuge.
place of
Yeah.
refuge, a place of inspiration, a place of encouragement, or is it a place of proving your sort of Israeli bona fides? I think it's the ultimate question of Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim kaim.
Meaning there's
There's not a
room.
one answer
There's
here.
room for the shul ulpan experience, the shul that integrates
100%.
you. But then we need shuls that kind of service.
100%. And so I'm not claiming that we have a monopoly on truth here. I'm just saying that we made a decision that this is what we're doing. And we also made a decision that we are going to be working very hard on what it is that we're saying, what it is we're projecting, what it is that we're bringing in terms of programming, in terms of speakers, in terms of the type of Torah that we're teaching. And I think that also is a piece of the story here, which is while we are in many cases what you would call a traditional Orthodox shul, my, myself, Yael, Rav Yonatan, his wife Karen, all of us, we draw from a shorish neshama, let's say, of similar roots in the more Hasidic, in the world of Pnima Torah, in the world of mysticism, and that is something that I think you find penetrating not just our community, but really the broader Jewish world as a whole today in a way that it hasn't in many, many years, because that type of Torah speaks to a yearning. It speaks to a need that where we are today demands more than just observance, more than just knowledge. We live in an information
Mm-hmm.
revolution where knowledge is becoming actually very cheap, but experience and commitment and awe is in short supply. And I think that also is a thread that comes through almost everything we do, and has been a key point in making sure that we're focused on being who it is that we need to be, and recognizing that we're not going to attract everyone. I'll just end by saying that the best criticism we ever got was from a friend of ours who comes and is very involved in our community. He said to me once over a Shabbos meal, he said, I was speaking with my roommates last week about why they don't come to Pnima. And he said that his roommate said, because Pnima, they're demanding too much of us. And I said to him, that's exactly right. And that's exactly perfect, because this doesn't have to be for everyone. And I think it's part of the narrative that you're trying to share here, which is there is both this project and this community and the specialness of what it is. And there is this movement of more and more institutional Jewish life opening up and beginning to
Beyond Pnima.
find itself and find its home in Eretz Yisrael. And that's why when we actually started the nonprofit organization that is the Kli that contains Pnima, we did not call it Pnima. We called it Habayit Yerushalayim. Both because, again, the concept of returning home and coming home in this generation to Yerushalayim, but also because we wanted to create a Kli that would be able to contain other versions of this and help other leaders, other rabbinical figures. You mentioned we have had other very serious rabbis, some of whom have been on this very show, be in touch with us about how do we do this? How do we come to Israel, and how do we open up, and how do we overcome the administrative hurdles
It's a
and the
wild
fundraising
irony.
and the
An American-born Orthodox rabbi is reaching out to you about how to build community in Israel, which is a testimony to really the secret sauce of your whole story, which is organic, which is like learning how to wed what you said, kavana with kavua, how to wed the experience, the intentionality, the interiority of Pnima with the kavua, a place that's reliable, that's dependable, that I could show up to, that, a place where everybody knows your name. We could invoke Cheers a little bit every once in a while. That's okay. As a little after your time, a little before your time. Cheers. I don't know if you remember that was. Do you know what Cheers is?
You're going over our heads here. I think you're dating
Here,
us.
this is killing me. This is like a little education. Cheers was the big show before Seinfeld, meaning the big show on NBC. Seinfeld, we do know, right?
Of course.
I'm educated. What is going on over here? No, but I love exactly what you just said. And I really think it is revolutionary. It is geuladik. It is redemptive what you are doing, building bias, building home, showing that there's a place for you. I think the day is going to come. We're going to laugh about this, because one day, and I mean this, there's going to be an 1840 in Israel.
Amen.
I don't think it's gonna be a synagogue, because we need other places. I think it's gonna be. I envision it: brick oven pizza, beer on tap, nightly spiritual conversation that's open to the public, and we go out of there. That's my dream. Like the brick oven. You understand what I'm describing?
Very much.
Brick oven, maybe French fries, but very small menu, 4 good beers on tap, and then like a good place where we enter a nightly spiritual interview, and then we serve pizza the rest of the day. Good, solid, strong pizza. I even know who I want my partner
stone
to
brick
be.
oven.
Yeah, you're still. Um, but I have one last question because you've inspired me because I've struggled a lot with my own trust fall
Mm.
of like believing that a lot of this starts with like believing that you have something, which
Mhm.
is I think what one of the things that you avoided by not being raised within the traditional Orthodox community, and this is going to sound crazy, I think you like hacked imposter syndrome, meaning you're already so outside
I'm reading a book about that right now.
hacking imposter syndrome, which we haven't touched upon, but like, look, I was like, you get like, you have an immediate out. Look, hey, I was reform middle of like, hey, like, there's no way I could know. It's so outside that when you come inside, it's like, look, the expectations aren't there. When you come within the world, sometimes you get sucked into the narcissism of small differences,
Mhm.
like, oh, you went to like more of like a co-ed modern Orthodox. We just went to single gender modern Orthodox. Oh, and you went to single gender yeshiva. So we obviously have nothing in common, right? Like the way that we get so sucked into that, you kind of hacked imposter syndrome. But I'll ask you directly because you said you want to write about it. How do you think it is that you were not totally suffocated by imposter syndrome? You're somebody who came to serious Jewish life and Jewish commitment a little bit later, or kind of you ramped up. How is it that you're not? I get imposter syndrome walking into somebody else's shul.
Yeah. I mean, that feeling does exist. I don't wanna, like, totally wash over the fact that that existed, and in taking on something like this, it's not we totally appreciate the grandeur and, again, just what a zchut this is to be doing. I mean, there's no question about that, and all the more so, we're a Beit Cham for lots of different students who
Explain
are
what that means, a
studying.
bayit cham.
We're a host family
Yeah.
for lots of students who are in across the spectrum from modern Orthodox, yeshivish, and so on, who are studying in Israel for the year. We love doing that. And we get to really share in that experience. And we've spent our time brief, but in the yeshiva university world, I mean, we have been able to inhabit these spaces as well. And so we definitely appreciate where different members of our community are coming from
But
and
you, Yael,
the span.
I wanna
Yeah.
push you.
Nope.
I'm interrupting
No, it's
deliberately.
fine.
How do you avoid being suffocated by imposter syndrome? Clearly, I'm sure you have thoughts, but how did it not seize hold of you?
You can't let it. That's the Yetzer Hara, and maybe this is just with the tshuva kind of coming in the air that you can't let it. You have to push that away. When my Rebbitzin, Shoshana Yudelman, she always, for anyone who's watching, like pushes with two hands. You just have to do that. Don't let that seize you because there's a moral imperative that we need to be doing. We are partners with Hashem in creating. And so I feel like every time this feels too big or too much imposter syndrome that no, it shouldn't be us. Well, who's it going to be? Jump in and it's time. We are part of building something amazing. And I would say, really dream the dream. This is about building Gula. This is about bringing Mashiach. And these can sound like crazy and daunting terms. And we're also really privileged in our shul and in our community. And we got this very much from Rav Shlomo as well. You have to be dreaming and talking about those things and being part of that, being really part of the partnership with Hashem in this creation, feel that. I mean, that like it can sound a little bit crazy and a little bit like, okay,
Mhm.
you've lost, but that's what's happening right now. And we have to grab that with two hands and lean completely into it. If it feels like there's nerves, then you probably have to push harder because you're mobilized and ready
Two
to
hands.
go. Yeah.
I love that answer. I would love to hear your thoughts on imposter syndrome, but I want to introduce, and you can come back to it, but I want to introduce what I was my final question before we go to our rapid fire questions. You've been so generous with your time. It's been so lovely to get to sit together, learn about what you're building, introduce this incredible mindset, but incredible home that exists to inspire others to build homes, to inspire others to visit your home, to just have people take in and enjoy the growth that both of you represent. But my last question, and again, I'll give you a chance if you want to jump in on the imposter syndrome, but I want to kind of end with this question, and it relates. I think about this a lot. I grew up within the Orthodox world, and maybe it's because of 1840. So I'm a little bit more public. You see a lot. You're on the nexus of a lot of very strongly differing opinions about what you should put forward, what the vision of the future should. And one thing that it knocks me out sometimes is sometimes the way or certain members within the Frum community behave. Um, in an even wider sense, we don't have to, pretend to be ignorant. Israel is in its most contentious fight. I would say this is the most contentious argument that we have had in the history of the Jewish people, meaning not in the last 50, in all of Jewish history. I would argue that a lot of the fights about the character of the state of Israel, the draft, Charedim, Chilonim, Dati, everybody is and I wonder as specifically as people who did not grow up within all of these kind of contentious religious battles, how do you deal with the fact that you undoubtedly get exposed to some of the uglier sides of religious life? We're all aware of it. It's to me, it's as much a part of religious life as anything else. But I can imagine when you're introduced to it, you have this hope for this kind of utopian, sweet, spiritual, uplifting, and then you see the Frum community or different pockets of it, and it's got a lot of the same obnoxious, shallow, short-sighted, wrong direction, and you could get caught up with the same cynicism that one would have for anything else. What do you use to protect yourselves from that type of cynicism, from that type of kind of like sense of being disappointed by the community that in the most organic and beautiful way you joined? How do you make sure that those little disappointments, if you do get exposed to them, don't kind of cut too deep and undermine your work and positivity?
I'll tell you the other side of the coin of what you're saying is that if you were to ask any Jew throughout history, what is the time that if you could choose throughout Jewish history that you would like to live as a Jew since the destruction of the temple, the answer would be today, and it would be today in Israel. As you said before, it could be that maybe 10 years ago, if you asked the same question, you might have gotten
Yeah,
you could
they'd
make an
say,
argument
yeah, the
about,
90s and the five towns,
it could be, but
yeah,
without a doubt, the
right now.
greatest time to live despite all the machlokas and all the challenge, which are real and we shouldn't deny that they exist. The greatest moment in Jewish history to be alive is this moment right now and to be part of what's happening in Eretz Yisrael. And I always found the concept of tikkun olam to be not just misinterpreted, but overemphasized. Because the truth is, it's not possible to tikkun olam.
Fix the whole world.
What is possible is to tikkun shchuna, if we could call it, to fix your neighborhood. And so we have the privilege. uh, It's a matnas chinam.
A free gift.
It's a
It's a
free
freebie.
gift that we've been blessed to live in a community amongst other members with friends, families, neighbors, who many of whom have heard at some point in their life that call of Lech Lecha, of going home, going back to Eretz Yisrael. And when you live amongst people who have made that giant decision, so many other nuances, so many other small pieces almost fade away in light of that. And the question doesn't become, how am I emphasizing or continuing to bicker about those differences that used to separate us, but actually, how do I make sure that I am embracing fully what the concept of Aliyah is all about? We've created a system where so many people, Aliyah, which means to ascend, which is the term we use when
Colloquially, to move to
colloquial
Israel.
when a person moves to Israel, has almost been redefined, unfortunately, by so many as the culmination of a Jewish journey,
Hmm.
the crowning achievement. And while it's certainly a monumental step, for no person who makes Aliyah should that moment when you land at Ben Gurion and kiss the ground be the pinnacle of your Jewish life. Has v'shalom. Moving to Eretz Yisrael should be a continual opportunity to ascend, to make Aliyah both
Again,
geographically but also spiritually. And when that's the mindset, and when that's the community you try your hardest to cultivate with a level of authenticity without pretending to be something you're not, but just being honest and genuine about what it is you're trying to do, how we're trying to do it, the fact that we're all part of this experiment to a certain sense, then all that other noise doesn't actually break through that often.
yeah, Al, I'm curious, that was so beautifully said, and it reminds me, that there was an anecdote. Rav Yitzchak Hutner, who has his picture in a lot of places. He was a student of a lot of the Ishbitz Torah that I know, captures Rav Shlomo Katz and myself. Rav Hutner one time said, as a play, he was very clever with words. It relates to what you said about Aliyah. He said he made a l'chaim once. He had a student who was making aliyah, and he made a l'chaim. And he said, usually we make a l'chaim so that the neshama could have an aliyah, that the soul, on a yard site, on the anniversary of somebody's death, you make a l'chaim so the soul could have an aliyah. Rav Hutner said, we're not going to make a l'chaim so that that a neshama could have an aliyah. Let's make a l'chaim that your aliyah should have a neshama,
Ah,
that the way that you move and the way that you come into Eretz Yisrael should have that soulfulness, constantly ascending, constantly moving upwards. I just want to hear a word from you. In your journey, that disappointment, when religious life, when frumkeit, when orthodoxy is not a label, is not a demographic, but it becomes your life and your people, you're surrounded. Like, did you ever have to grapple with disappointment, and how do you make sense of all of the infighting and the disappointment that one could have when you get, you see it up close? This is who we are. This is what the community is. How do you make sure that you don't become cynical or jaded or bitter? What have you done, Yael?
Right. I mean, that's real, and I de- certainly try to focus on the positive, but can't sugarcoat that these have been challenging years in a lot of ways. And I think it really is walking down the street and you see the buildings flying up around you, and I think that level of sort of what brings about the fighting really does come from a place of passion. And there's this moment that this is a this is history unfolding in real life, and there are people who feel incredibly passionate about that and want to see their theory of how that goes through be the one that the seed that plants and takes off. And there are differing views on that in a lot of ways. We're not where we need to be, we're on the path. And so making a space for that infighting really more so as machlokas l'shem shemaim. I mean, that is ideally, and maybe that's a little bit of an idealistic way to view it, but
No, I
that
love that.
is really what it needs to be. And if it's occurring anywhere, it really should be in Yerushalayim. I mean, that's where the Torah is being grappled and sort of
I
played
love
out.
that. Meaning to look at the machlokes as a sign of vitality, of like, if we're gonna fight, let's not fight over who made the nicer bar mitzvah, or let's not fight over who cut off who in traffic.
Right.
Let's be in the center of the world, at the heart of the world, really thinking about like what's unfolding right now.
Right.
And
Let's do it like Menches. I mean, there's some room for cleaning it up a little bit, but let's I mean, that's yeah, it's vitality, and that's saying there's a pulse here, and we're part of a living, breathing, everyone wants to, feel and be just a visceral society, and it's building right now, and, jump on board, and if you're upset watching it, jump on board and have an opinion too. It's not gonna, this is allowed people.
I
I'll
love
just
that.
add that the moment I think a person recognizes that Israel is a real country with real challenges and real flaws and real opportunities, just like any other country in the world, that's the moment that they're actually living in Israel, the real place, not just the concept in their mind.
Concept in your
And once you can recognize that, then you also can jump in and get involved to whatever degree is appropriate for you and your life and your talents and your mission of what you should be doing for you and your family.
your Lech Lecha story and opening up doorways for other people to have their Lech Lecha, their going out, leaving their birthplace, their country, their home, founding neighborhood, and going out and building something new that could be a home not only for yourselves, but for so many others. Beyond inspiring. It has been such a privilege to meet you. I always end my interviews with more rapid fire questions. I'm always looking for good book recommendations, especially given that the name of your community is Pnima,
Mm.
a word I use in English very often. And I've had listeners call me out and say, "You made up that word." And I said, "Look it up in the dictionary. It's not made up." And that's the term interiority,
Mhm.
insideness.
Mhm.
That's interiority. I'm curious, book recommendations. When you think of the Torah of internality, what are the books? Ideally in English, of course. We're surrounded by books in both in many languages. Um, but what are the Torahs, the books that really helped open your eyes and bring you closer to the Torah that is now the bedrock of your community?
Maybe it's just because we've been speaking so much about Rav Riskin, but I'm thinking about listening to God, inspirational stories for my grandchildren is really a must
Rabbi
for,
Riskin's book.
yeah, by Rav Riskin. And I just think that's a must in terms of dreaming about what can be in Israel.
Absolutely beautiful. Do you have a book recommendation?
I want to take this opportunity to just say that for everyone who's listening to this community, this new vanguard that's developing in Israel of communities popping up is not just for those who are living in Israel, but it's for the entire Jewish community. And we want to invite everyone to come and to participate. And for those who are interested in being involved in these things, that is what we're really building for. And so we want to just take an opportunity to
So
invite
happy that you
the
did
whole
that. You're not
community.
getting off the hook with the book recommendation.
I just want to take the opportunity to invite anyone who's interested in learning more and learning how this can come to their community in Israel, how they can find
Oh, we're gonna
themselves.
have all your contact info. Don't even worry about it. You hopefully, God willing, you'll be shooing away rabbis with a stick, and congregants will be knocking on your door. I'm not even remotely worried, but I still want that book recommendation. And I just told you I'm opening up a brick oven pizza place. I'll probably be around the block from you
We're
Well,
guys.
a
there.
community actually just acquired a building. We're about to start a large campaign. And
Wow.
therefore, if you, 1840, have a generous donor who would like to establish the 1840 Pizza Oven Kitchen in our basement, we'd be thrilled to
I
partner
am.
together.
I'm ready, and it's not such a crazy idea. And there, can I be honest with you? Thank God, because this is a digital community, there are so many other people. We are not alone. I just want you to know this. We are not alone. These visions, you're in Katamon. We're here. This is not about geography. This yearning for something a little bit different, something that resonates a little bit deeper, for a Yiddishkeit that begins inside and then goes and lights up the whole world. We are not alone. And thank God there are philanthropists, there are followers, there are leaders, there are Talmidei Chachamim and Rosh Yeshiva. They're not always in the front. It's scary to be in the front. It's scary to be the first to jump in something. I know that. You know that. But one thing I want to promise you is we're not alone, but I still need that book recommendation.
Yeshiva Shalom. Every Shabbos morning, we have the schut of having a chabura who learns a piece on the parsha. Yeshiva Shalom is the Slonim Rebbe, a deep and beautiful sefer who opens up ideas in the Torah, ideas in the Chagim in a way that's relevant and applicable to our lives. And the most beautiful piece of it is you don't need deep background in Kabbalah and
And the Hebrew is
Chassidus.
very
The
accessible.
Hebrew is accessible. The concepts are accessible, and yet for all of the accessibility they contain, they don't lack depth in any way, shape, or form.
Beautiful recommendation. Is there an English book that you could recommend also? Just a little cherry on top? Just because I let you plug your community and then all that stuff. I want an English book recommendation.
Specifically?
No, a book that helped you access a little closer your own panemius. If you look, if you look, by the way, my Rebbe shelf is over there. You could see it over there. Most of the books are classical Hasidic works, Reb Tzadok, Rabbi Nachman, Rav Kook. But in the top right, you see that's Gary Shandling, that's Christian Wyman, that's Irvin Yalom, Norm Macdonald should be up here. It doesn't only have to be. So I'm open to anything, but I do want an English book from you. I'm not gonna let you. I'm gonna take your passports, honestly, until we get that English book. Now you're cheating when you're looking around. This is the usual suspects. I'm gonna see all.
I'll say an English book that really opened up my religious world,
Please.
particularly my Shabbos world, was The Sabbath by Abraham Joshua Heschel, which I read for the first time in college and I've read many times ever since, and continues to animate the way in which I look at Judaism and particularly Shabbat.
Two of my rabbeim. I have been recommended the Sabbath by two of my teachers. I don't know that they want me to. One of them passed away, Reb Ezra Newberger, when I was in Ner Yisrael, said, and he said it kind of like it like half jokes, like, you know, we've tried, but no one did it better than Heschel. Like, we try as you may, no one has. And Rav Beryl Gershenfeld, we mentioned him already, recommended me to read The Sabbath, which I found. I wasn't in the yeshiva, but I knew him way back when. My next question, I'm people curious. Somebody gave you a great deal of money, but you had to go back to school, take a sabbatical, and earn a PhD in any topic of your choice. What do you think the subject of your dissertation would be about?
Kind of veering from what we've spoken about, but mine would certainly be about music. I actually started studying music once I got to Israel. Once we returned from our time in Abu Dhabi, I started studying music once I had a baby at home and I
You played
began
instrument?
part-time. I play piano, but I am now actually starting to teach at Shirat Halavim, which is Yonatan Reisel's music school.
Sure.
It's wonderful. He is tremendous. And there's a men's track and a women's track. So his sister Rika Reisel is actually largely leading on the women's track, and he oversees and leads the whole program. And I'll be starting to teach there actually in 2 weeks, an English speaking class. It's usually Hebrew. And I am continuing to study simultaneous to my teaching, and I'm looking
Amazing.
forward to bringing out this auditory development course
That's
in 2
so
weeks.
holy. And then it relates to everything in Hasidus. Language without words is his music. My dear friend Ben, somebody gave you a great deal of money, go back to school. What's the subject of that dissertation?
I already outed myself as being dyslexic, so the concept of going back to university and doing a PhD is
You're
the
like,
stuff of my
"Please."
nightmares. But I would go sit in yeshiva and learn Torah Lishma in a way that
You have an area of
always wanted
Torah
to.
that you have not yet gotten to plumb its depths, but it intrigues you. A sugya, a masechta, an area of Torah that you feel is calling for you.
I would sit and learn Talmud. I would start at the beginning of Brachos. I'm
And-
hoping to join the Daf Yomi this next cycle
Oh,
and just
coming soon.
plow through.
Absolutely beautiful. My final question, I'm always curious about people's sleep schedules. What time do you go to sleep at night and what time do you wake up in the morning?
Aim for 9, somewhere between 9 and 10, because I'm
Go to
generally
sleep.
going to sleep because I'm generally up pretty early with the little one
That's pretty
at
early.
5 or something, like 5:30. So
Okay.
we're in that stage. So I try to get to sleep. I find that the deep sleep happens on the earlier end and just get up ready to go.
Ben?
Same. Between 9:30 and 10:30, trying to head to sleep. I try to wake up at 5. Since COVID, I've had the privilege of having a 5:30 a.m. chavrusa where I ride on a stationary bike and my Rebbe rides on a stationary bike. And
Nuh-uh.
we learned Gemara on Zoom together.
What
we
are you
call
learning
it,
now?
We call it Neshama Cycle.
Neshama Neshama cycle. What are you learning now
It's
with
a
him?
wonderful way to start the day.
What are you learning now with him, with his Rebbe?
We're learning Chulin.
My dearest friends, Yael, Ben, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having us. It's been wonderful.
Here's my takeaway from the episode, and it dawned on me. You could almost see it in my eyes midway through the episode. And this saddens me to say and to admit, but I think that their courage to jump out, the faith that was required to jump out and start this community, I sometimes wonder whether that is connected to their very origin story. And I sometimes wonder, growing up in a very kind of regimented, frum community, in the Orthodox community, which has been so wonderful, and I wouldn't trade it for anything else in the world. But sometimes when you grow up in one community, it can actually limit your thought. You could say, well, I can't start a community in Israel in a central location. Like, doesn't have to go through the proper channels. Who am I to do that? And you could end up developing a certain, I don't know if it's imposter syndrome, but as a sense of like, oh, that's not for me. That's not what somebody in my station does. And what I find so remarkable about Ben and Yael, specifically as Baalei Teshuva, as people who were not raised within the Orthodox community, nobody told them no. Nobody told them this is not the way that it's done. This is not the way to build community. And really through their mentorship, and I need to specifically mention their Rebbe, Rav Shlomo Katz, as well as my dearest, dearest friend, Rabbi Yosef Bronstein, who's the one who really put this couple on my radar and said they are doing extraordinary things. And a lament that I have and something to think about is how our own upbringing can sometimes limit the possibilities of our thought, of what we feel comfortable or safe doing. And what I find so amazing about the Baal Teshuva mentality is there is something very transformative, very creative. If I can take my own religious identity and transform it, evolve it into something else, then surely I don't need to pay attention to every barrier and every obstruction in my way in life. And it really unlocks you for what you can build in your own life and what opportunities lay in front of you. And on a very personal level, I felt listening to them, I felt constricted. I felt I have so many self-made roadblocks in my own life of what I can and cannot do. I never would have dreamed of doing this. And I think a lot of American rabbis is like, there's a channel, you build a shul. If you're you have a super popular shul, super great shul, then maybe you can, think about bringing that community to Israel. And they did something totally different. They said, why not? Nobody else is doing this. This is something that somebody desperately needs. And without any expectations, without any worry of what if this fails, what if it doesn't take off, I think a lot of those worries come up from within the community of what you see, reactions that you then superimpose on your own endeavors. And they're almost starting with this simplicity, with this sweetness of looking at the world and saying, why not? Why can't I be the person to do this? And really midway through the interview, it was a little bit of sensing my own constriction and also looking and being inspired of what somebody who has never been told no, who's been never told this is not how it's normally done, to go ahead and not only transform their own individual selves, but build communally. It is such an inspiring story and one that I need to reflect on a very personal level to figure out, like, what are my constraints that I'm not thinking of because of my upbringing, because this is not the path that is normally taken. We sometimes we like our paths to be very well paved. We like highways, and then when we're on it, we complain and we're saying, I want to do something new. And instead, when Yiddishkeit has a newness to it, when Judaism has a newness to it, you're able to take risks. You're able to let go of that fear of failure in ways that and I'm really only talking about myself in this, that when you're raised kind of within a certain construct, that conceptia of what can and cannot be done, it can be severely limiting. And I'm just so personally grateful for Ben and Yael for sharing their story and reminding all of us that let go of the barriers, let go of this is not how it's normally done. Have faith in your own Torah, have faith in yourself, and ask, why not? Why not build this? And their community and what they've done, both on a personal level and a communal level, I found so deeply inspiring. And really to turn the question on ourselves and kind of notice the risks that we are unwilling to take because we are so tethered to that paved highway. And I'm just so grateful to Ben and Yael for giving the tools and maybe a story of inspiration for how to break out of that. So thank you so much for listening to this episode of 1840. Thank you again to our series sponsors, Daniel and Mira Stokar. I'm so grateful for your friendship and support over all these years. This episode, like so many of our episodes, was edited by our incredible friend Dina Emerson, along with our new video editor, who I'm so grateful for, Tzvi Simchon. Thank you both to Tzvi and Dina. If you enjoyed this episode or any of our episodes, please subscribe, rate, review, tell your friends about it. You could probably hit that subscribe button right below. I always see people do this in YouTube videos. If there's a little subscribe there, I don't know if there's actually going to be a button below, but give it a shot. It really helps us grow as a community. And of course, we are a platform that is supported 100% by our listeners. It really, if you have the ability to give a donation, you can of course donate at 1840.org. We have a donation button. You can also, of course, leave us a voicemail with feedback or questions that we may play on a future episode. We definitely need to get back to another listener feedback episode. That number is 212-582-1840. Once again, that number for our we do it a bunch of times. Our listener feedback episode is 212-582-1840. If you'd like to learn more about this topic or some of the other great ones we've covered in the past, be sure to check out 1840.org. That's 18forty.org, where you can also find videos, articles, recommended readings, and weekly emails. Thank you so much for listening, and stay curious, my friends.
Shomer Yisrael Shemor She'eris Yisrael V'yayovad Yisrael Omrim Shema Yisrael Shomer Yisrael Shemor She'eris Yisrael V'yayovad Yisrael Ha'omerim Shema Yisrael Shomer Yisrael Shemor She'eris Yisrael V'yayovad Yisrael Omrim Shema Yisrael Oy Shomer Yisrael Shemor She'eris Yisrael V'yayovad Yisrael Omrim Shema Yisrael Yisrael Shomer Yisrael Shemor She'eris Yisrael V'yayovad Yisrael Ha'omerim Shema Yisrael Shomer Yisrael Shemor